The air in New York's most exclusive Italian restaurant, La Stella Caduta, was thick enough to choke on, not with cigar smoke, but with fear. At the corner table under a dim chandelier sat Dante Moretti, a man whose name was a prayer on the lips of his friends and a curse on the lips of his enemies. He was there with his mother, the untouchable matriarch Isabella, whose silence was more profound than any command. She was deaf, and tonight she was frustrated. Then from the shadows a waitress stepped forward, a girl named Anelise, who spent her life trying to be invisible. But when she raised her hands, her fingers weaving a silent, eloquent language for the deaf woman, she did the one thing she'd spent years avoiding. She got noticed. And in Dante Moretti's world, being noticed was a death sentence, or the beginning of something far more dangerous. The clatter of silverware and the low hum of conversation at La Stella Caduta were a familiar symphony to Anelise Russo. For 2 years, this sound had been the backdrop to her life of carefully constructed invisibility. She was the waitress who refilled your water before you noticed it was empty, the one who cleared plates with the ghostly efficiency of a whisper. She kept her eyes down, her voice soft, and her presence so minimal that regulars barely registered her face. Invisibility was survival. Tonight, however, a discordant note had entered her symphony, the Moretti table. Dante Moretti wasn't just a patron. He was the landlord of the very reality they all inhabited. The restaurant owner, Mr. Giordano, sweated through his silk shirt whenever Moretti made a reservation. The staff moved with a skittish, terrified precision. Dante was a man carved from granite and shadows. His tailored suit, unable to conceal the raw power coiled in his shoulders. His eyes, the color of burnt espresso, missed nothing. They swept the room with a predator's casual ownership, cataloguing exits, threats, and weaknesses. But his focus tonight was on the woman beside him, his mother, Isabella Moretti. She was a vision of old-world elegance, with silver hair coiled perfectly and eyes that held a sharp, undiminished intelligence. A stroke years ago had stolen her hearing, plunging her into a world of silence. She communicated with a worn, leather-bound notepad and a pen, a slow and often frustrating process. The senior waiter, a man named Paolo, who prided himself on his unflappable demeanor, was crumbling. Isabella was trying to ask about the ingredients in the risotto, her gestures becoming sharper, her frustration mounting. Paolo, misunderstanding, simply kept pointing at the menu and speaking louder, his face a mask of panic. She wants to know if there is saffron and truffle oil. Dante's voice was a low growl, devoid of patience. Not one or the other. Si, Signor Moretti. Of course, Paolo stammered, bowing. But he still wasn't getting it. Anelise watched from behind a marble pillar, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt a familiar ache seeing Isabella's predicament. The isolation, the frustration of being unheard. It was a pain. She knew intimately. Her own younger brother, Leo, had been born deaf. From the age of 5, Anelise had learned to speak with her hands, not just to communicate, but to build a bridge to her brother's silent world. American Sign Language was her second language, a secret fluency she never revealed. It was a relic of a life she had buried. Isabella slapped the notepad shut with a sigh of resignation, waving a dismissive hand as if to say, "Forget it." A shadow of disappointment crossed her face. Something inside Anelise snapped. It was a reckless, stupid impulse, born of a compassion that had no place in this world of predators. Before she could stop herself, she was moving. She stepped out from behind the pillar, her tray held tight in one hand. She approached the table, ignoring Paolo's frantic glare and the sudden intense focus of Dante Moretti's gaze. Her own eyes were only for Isabella. She placed the tray on a nearby stand, took a breath, and lifted her hands. "Excuse me, Signora Moretti." Her fingers spelled out with a fluid, practiced grace. The chef uses both a very light saffron to color the rice, but the primary aroma is from white truffle oil, finished with fresh shavings. The entire table went silent. Dante's 2 bodyguards, standing like statues against the wall, tensed. Paolo's jaw dropped. Isabella Moretti stared, her intelligent eyes widening. A slow, wondrous smile spread across her lips. The frustration melted away, replaced by pure, unadulterated delight. She lifted her own hands a little slower, a little rustier, but with an unmistakable clarity. "You speak the language of hands." Anelise's heart was hammering so loud, she was sure the whole room could hear it. Dante's stare was so intense, it felt like a physical weight. But looking at Isabella's hopeful face, she found a sliver of courage. "Yes." Anelise signed back a small, shy smile, touching her own lips for the first time that night. A little." Isabella's hand scoffed playfully. "My dear, you are a poet." Dante Moretti said nothing. He simply watched his face, an unreadable mask. He observed the way Annelise's fingers moved, not just forming words, but conveying tone, respect, and a warmth that had been absent from his mother's interactions for years. He saw the genuine light in his mother's eyes, a light he hadn't seen since before her illness. He watched this mousy, forgettable waitress transform into someone luminous. Anelise took their entire order in sign language, discussing variations, wine pairings, and dessert options with Isabella. It was a silent, graceful ballet that left the rest of the table mesmerized. When she finally retreated to the kitchen, the spell was broken. "Luca," Dante said quietly to the man on his right, his trusted consigliere, Luca Vizzini. "Boss, find out everything there is to know about her." Dante's eyes followed Annelise's retreating form. Her name, where she lives, who her family is, everything. I want it on my desk by morning. The order was simple, but the tone was not. It wasn't a request for a background check on a new employee. It was the command of a king who had just discovered an unexpected jewel in his kingdom and intended to possess it. Anelise, trembling as she placed the order with the chef, had no idea that her small act of kindness had just shattered her carefully constructed invisibility. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the blinding, dangerous light of Dante Moretti, and in his world there was no going back. The next day, Annelise's life was irrevocably altered. She was halfway through her shift, the knot of anxiety from the previous night still sitting heavy in her stomach, when Mr. Giordano called her into his office. Luca Vizzini was there, standing with the quiet menace of a loyal wolf. He wasn't in a suit, but his casual clothes did little to soften the hard lines of his face or the professional coldness in his eyes. Annelise, Mr. Giordano, began, unable to meet her gaze. "Mr. Moretti has made you an offer. A new position." A new position," she stammered, her eyes darting to Luca. "I don't understand." Luca spoke, his voice calm and even, which was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "Signora Moretti was very impressed with you. Mr. Moretti wishes to employ you as her personal companion and interpreter. You would live at the Moretti estate. Your duties would be to assist her, accompany her, and facilitate her communication." He slid a pristine white envelope across the desk. "Your salary will be 5 times what you make here, all living expenses covered. Anelise stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. Live with them in the lion's den. The idea was preposterous, terrifying. Her entire life was built on avoiding men like Dante Moretti, men whose power was rooted in violence and fear. "Thank you, but I can't," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have a life here. I have responsibilities." She thought of Leo, her younger brother, living in a small assisted living apartment 3 states away, the reason for her every sacrifice. Luca's expression didn't change. He slid a second envelope across the desk. This one was manila slightly thicker. "We are aware of your responsibilities. Leonardo Russo, 20 years old, currently residing at the Oak Park Assisted Facility in Pennsylvania. He suffers from congenital heart disease, requires ongoing specialist care. Care that is, I imagine, quite expensive." The blood drained from Anelise's face. They knew about Leo. They knew his name, where he was. The casual mention of her brother was not a piece of information. It was a threat wrapped in a silk bow. The first envelope was an offer. The second was the reason she had to accept. As part of the compensation package, Luca continued smoothly. "Mr. Moretti has arranged for your brother to be transferred to the Lenox Hill Private Cardiology Unit here in New York. He will be under the care of Dr. Alistair Finch, the best in the country. All expenses, including experimental treatments not covered by insurance, will be taken care of." Anelise sank into the chair opposite the desk, her legs giving out. Dr. Finch, she had read about his work, dreamed of getting Leo into one of his clinical trials. It was a fantasy, a 1 in a million shot she could never afford. Now it was being handed to her on a silver platter, but the platter belonged to the devil himself. "Why?" she whispered, looking at Luca. "Why go to all this trouble for a waitress?" "My boss gets what he wants," Luca said simply. "And he wants his mother to be happy. You make her happy." He paused, his gaze hardening slightly. "It's a generous offer, Anelise. I would advise you to take it." There was no choice. Her carefully constructed world had been dismantled in a matter of hours. To refuse would not only doom her brother, but it would likely put them both in danger. You didn't say no to Dante Moretti. 2 days later, a black car, silent and imposing, collected her from her tiny apartment. Anelise arrived at the Moretti estate, a sprawling stone fortress overlooking the Hudson River. It was beautiful, opulent, and as welcoming as a mausoleum. Her first few weeks were a blur of disorientation. She lived in a suite of rooms more luxurious than any hotel she'd ever seen, with a private balcony and a closet full of clothes that had been purchased for her. She was a bird in a gilded cage. Her time with Isabella, however, was a genuine comfort. The matriarch was sharp, funny, and deeply lonely. Through their silent conversations, Anelise learned about her life, her late husband, and her fierce, unconditional love for her complicated son. "He was always so serious, even as a boy," Isabella sighed one afternoon as they sat in the garden. "He carried the world on his shoulders, long before it was his to carry." Anelise saw a different side of Dante through his mother's eyes, but the man himself remained an enigma. He was a phantom in his own home, leaving before she woke and returning long after she and Isabella had retired for the evening. He was a presence she felt more than saw in the hushed respect of the staff, the constant silent vigilance of his men, and the palpable tension that settled over the house whenever his car swept up the driveway. He would join them for dinner twice a week. Those meals were agonizingly tense affairs. Anelise would sit between Dante and his mother, her hands moving gracefully as she translated their conversation. She was the bridge between their two worlds. Dante rarely spoke to Anelise directly. He would address his mother, and Anelise would translate her own presence, meant to be as seamless and unnoticeable as a pane of glass. But she felt his eyes on her. She felt his gaze linger on her hands as she signed on the curve of her neck, when she looked at his mother on her face, when she smiled at something Isabella said. One evening, Isabella was recounting a funny story about Dante as a child, involving a stolen pastry and a very angry nun. Anelise, translating the tale, couldn't help but let a genuine, uninhibited laugh escape her. The sound was bright and clear in the quiet dining room. Dante, who had been listening with a stony expression, stopped eating, his eyes locked on hers. For a single, breathless moment, the predator was gone, replaced by something curious, something almost soft. A flicker of a smile touched the corner of his mouth before it vanished. He cleared his throat and addressed his mother, but his eyes remained on Anelise. "Tell her," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The nun caught me. I had to scrub the entire convent floor as penance." Annelise's hands froze mid-air. He had spoken to his mother, but the words were for her. It was the first time he had acknowledged her as more than just a tool, more than an interpreter. She translated his words for Isabella, but a strange, terrifying warmth spread through her chest. It was a dangerous feeling, this spark of connection to a man who represented everything she feared. She was supposed to be invisible, a ghost in his machine. But the longer she stayed in the gilded cage, the more she felt herself being seen, and the more she looked back. Life within the Moretti estate settled into a strange rhythm. Days were spent with Isabella. Walks in the meticulously kept gardens, visits to private galleries, quiet afternoons, reading in the vast library. Anelise became Isabella's confidant, her window to the world. In turn, Isabella became the mother figure Anelise had lost so long ago. The bond between them deepened, forged in silence and mutual understanding. Annelise's relationship with Dante, however, remained a delicate dance of distance and unnerving proximity. He was a man of discipline and control, yet she began to see the cracks in his armor. She saw him in the early mornings, alone on the terrace, a solitary cup of coffee in hand, staring out at the river, with a weight in his eyes that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the burden of his name. One night, she couldn't sleep. The house was unnervingly quiet, drawn by a sliver of light from under the library door. She padded silently down the hallway. She peeked through the small gap where the heavy oak door was slightly ajar. Dante was inside, but he wasn't working. On the large mahogany desk, amidst spreadsheets and ledgers, lay a worn, leather-bound book. He was tracing a line of poetry with his finger, his expression unguarded melancholic. Anelise recognized the book. It was a collection of Italian poetry his mother adored. He was reading a piece by Petrarch, one Isabella had told her was his late father's favorite. He looked up suddenly as if sensing her presence. His eyes met hers through the crack in the door. She froze, expecting anger, a harsh command to leave. Instead, his face held only a profound weariness. He didn't speak, just held her gaze for a long moment before looking back down at the book. Anelise retreated, her heart pounding. She had seen the man behind the mask, a son mourning his father, a man seeking solace in silent words. The monster was becoming dangerously human. Her brother Leo was thriving under Dr. Finch's care. Their weekly video calls were the anchor to her old life. "They have me on this new medication, Anna," he'd said last week, his voice stronger than it had been in years. His hands flew as he spoke a habit from their childhood. "The doctor says my ejection fraction is up. Can you believe it?" "That's amazing, Leo," she'd replied, a lump in her throat. This was what it was all for. This was why she slept in the house of a killer. "This place is incredible," he continued, "but the security is tighter than Fort Knox. Who is this Mr. Moretti anyway?" "Some kind of philanthropist." Anelise's smile was brittle. "Something like that." The lie tasted like ash. Her gilded kitsch was built on a foundation of violence, and the whispers were impossible to ignore. She would hear snippets of conversations from Luca and the other men, mentions of the Santoro problem, a shipment at the docks making an example. Each phrase was a chilling reminder of the world she was now a part of. The Santoro problem seemed to be escalating. Marco Santoro, the ambitious and ruthless head of a rival family, was making a power play. He was encroaching on Moretti territory, and the tension was palpable. One evening, Dante came home late, a dark bruise high on his cheekbone and a split lip. He did nothing to conceal. He walked straight past Anelise and his mother in the foyer, without a word, the fury rolling off him in palpable waves. Later that night, Anelise was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when he entered. He moved to the sink, splashing cold water on his face. She saw the raw anger in the set of his jaw, but also a flicker of pain. On impulse, she dampened a clean cloth and held it out to him. "For your lip," she said softly. He turned his dark eyes boring into hers. For a moment she thought he would lash out. Instead, he took the cloth, his fingers brushing hers. The brief contact was like an electric shock. He pressed the cloth to his mouth, wincing slightly. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice rough. "Is everything all right?" The question was foolish. Of course it wasn't. He gave a short, harsh laugh. "Everything is exactly as it always is." He looked at her then, a strange intensity in his gaze. "You shouldn't be here, Anelise. In this house, in this life." "You're the one who brought me here," she retorted, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a spark of defiance. "Yes," he admitted, his voice dropping lower. "I was." It was a selfish decision. He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking. She could smell the faint scent of iron and expensive cologne. "My mother, she shines when you are with her. But this world, it tarnishes everything beautiful." His eyes dropped to her hands, which were clasped nervously in front of her. He reached out, not to touch her, but to hover his fingers just above hers. "These hands," he said, his voice a near whisper, "they create bridges. They speak truth. My hands, they only know how to break things." He pulled back abruptly, the mask of the dawn sliding back into place. "Go to bed," he ordered, his tone once again harsh and dismissive. "It's late." Anelise fled, her body trembling. He was right. She didn't belong here. But the terrifying truth was, she was no longer sure she wanted to leave. Her fear of him was slowly, dangerously being replaced by a complex tangle of compassion, fascination, and a burgeoning attraction she refused to name. A week later, Luca Vzini approached her while she was arranging flowers in the sunroom. His expression was grim. "I need to ask you a question," he said, his tone devoid of pleasantries. "Your name, Russo. Are you related to Alberto Russo?" Anelise felt the blood freeze in her veins. Her throat went dry. Alberto Russo, the name of the father she barely remembered. The name she had shed along with her old life. The name of the man whose death had sent her and Leo into hiding. He was my father. She managed to say, her voice a thread. He died when I was a child. Luca's eyes narrowed. Your father was a bookkeeper. Do you know who he worked for? The gilded cage had just become a trap, and Anelise knew with sickening certainty that the door had just slammed shut behind her. She was the daughter of a ghost, and his past had finally come to claim her. He worked for the Santoro family. The words came from Luca, but they echoed in Annelise's mind with the force of a gunshot. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled into dust. The secret she had protected for over a decade was out. She stared at Luca, her face a pale mask of terror. How did you find out? It's my job to find things out, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. There were discrepancies in your background. A sealed juvenile record under a different name. Anelise Bellini. A social security number issued 16 years ago, not 22. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Alberto Russo, a.k.a. Albert Bellini. A bookkeeper for the Santoro, who turned federal witness. He and his family were put into witness protection, but the Santoro found him anyway. A car bomb. You and your brother were the only survivors. Every word was a hammer blow, resurrecting the trauma she had fought so hard to bury. The screech of tires, the blinding flash, the smell of burning gasoline. The memory was a phantom limb always aching. Dante knows, she whispered, her hands beginning to tremble. He knows, Luca confirmed. He's waiting for you in his study. Walking to Dante's study was the longest walk of her life. Each step was heavy with dread. She was the daughter of a rat. In their world, that was the ultimate sin, a betrayal punishable by death. The kindness she had been shown, the safety of Leo, the fragile, budding connection with Dante, it was all a lie, and the bill had just come due. She entered the study without knocking. Dante was standing by the window, his back to her, staring out at the grey, churning river. The room was silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock. You lied to me, he said, his voice dangerously calm. He didn't turn around. I didn't lie, she said, finding a sliver of strength. I omitted. My name is Anelise Russo. My past is my own. Your past is a landmine in my home. He spun around, his face a thundercloud of fury. The control he so carefully maintained was gone, replaced by raw, cold rage. Your father worked for Marco Santoro's father. He betrayed them. He sang to the feds. Do you have any idea what that makes you? It makes me the daughter of a man who did the right thing. She shot back, her own fear igniting into anger. My father saw the filth and the violence, and he refused to be a part of it. They killed him for it. They tried to kill my brother and me. We've been running our entire lives. I did what I had to do to survive, to protect Leo by running straight into the arms of his rival. Dante sneered, advancing on her. What were you planning, Anelise? Were you sent here by Marco? Are you a spy feeding him information about my mother? My business. The accusation was so vile, so far from the truth, that it knocked the air from her lungs. No. How can you even think that it's my job to think that? It's how I stay alive, he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. The sound echoed in the silent room. Everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something. What do you want? Annelise's tears of frustration and terror streamed down her face. I wanted my brother to live. I wanted a life where I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder. A life where I could just be invisible. Her voice broke. You're the one who dragged me into the light. You're the one who wouldn't let me be. He stood before her, now close enough for her to see the conflicting emotions wearing in his eyes. Fury, betrayal, and something else, something deeper that he fought to conceal. "My father," she continued, her voice dropping to a raw whisper, "was a good man in a bad world. He was a bookkeeper, not a killer. When he realized the full extent of what they were doing, he tried to get out. They wouldn't let him. The FBI was his only option. He did it for us to give us a chance at a real life." She looked him straight in the eye, her tears forgotten. "You talk about betrayal. What about you? You used my brother's health to trap me in your house. You held his life in your hands and called it a job offer. Don't you dare talk to me about lies and angles." Her defiance stunned him into silence. No one spoke to him that way. No one challenged him. He saw not the daughter of his enemy's rat, but a terrified woman who had been fighting a war her entire life. A war not so different from his own. He saw the same fierce, protective loyalty in her that he felt for his own mother. The rage drained out of him, replaced by a heavy, complicated silence. He had brought her here for his mother, a selfish act. He had investigated her out of suspicion and necessary precaution, but in the process he had come to care for the woman who stood before him, trembling but unbroken. Her past didn't make her a threat. It made her a survivor, and it put her in more danger than she could possibly imagine. If Marco Santoro ever discovered who she was, he wouldn't rest until he'd finished the job his father had started. Dante reached out his hand, hesitating for a moment before he gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, it made her flinch. "Marco cannot find out who you are," he said, his voice low and serious. "If he knows Alberto Russo's daughter is alive and under my roof, he'll see it as a message, a challenge. He will come for you." "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice small. Dante's expression hardened again, but the anger was no longer directed at her. It was aimed outward at the world that threatened to harm her. "You are not going anywhere," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "From this moment on, you are under my protection. No one will harm you. I will not allow it." It was not a question. It was a vow. In that moment, Anelise realized the nature of her cage had changed. It was no longer a prison of obligation. It had become a fortress, and the man she had feared as her captor had just declared himself her sworn protector. The line between them, already blurred, had just been erased completely. And in the dangerous world of Dante Moretti, protection and possession were one and the same. The revelation of Anelise's past changed everything. The unspoken tension between her and Dante was replaced by a charged, palpable connection. He was no longer just her employer. He was her guardian, the sole keeper of a secret that could get them both killed. The dynamic in the house shifted. Dante's presence became a constant. He started joining her and his mother for breakfast. He'd find reasons to be in the library when they were there, watching from a distance as their silent conversations flowed. His protection was absolute and suffocating. Anelise was not allowed to leave the estate without Luca or another trusted bodyguard. Her calls with Leo were monitored not out of suspicion but for her safety. She was more of a prisoner than ever. Yet paradoxically, she began to feel a sense of belonging. The fear she had of Dante was slowly being replaced by a dangerous magnetic pull. She saw the immense pressure he was under, the constant threats he parried, the solitude of his position. He was a king on a chessboard, surrounded by enemies, and she and his mother were the two pieces he would sacrifice his entire army to protect. One rainy afternoon, she found him in the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with his mother's orchids. He was tending to a rare black orchid, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he misted its petals. "My mother loves these," he said without turning around. "She says they're like us, Morettes, beautiful, difficult, and they thrive in the shadows." Anelise stood in the doorway watching him. "She told me you built this conservatory for her after she lost her hearing. She said you wanted her to have a place where the silence was beautiful." He finally turned to face her, a small, sad smile on his lips. "It was the only thing I could think of to give her. I can't give her back the world of sound." "You gave her a world," Anelise said softly, "and you gave me back to her." He stepped closer, the scent of damp earth and rain clinging to him. "No, Anelise, you did that all on your own." His eyes searched her face. "Are you afraid of me?" The question hung in the humid air between them. A month ago, the answer would have been an unequivocal yes. Now it was far more complicated. "I'm afraid of what you do," she answered honestly. "I'm afraid of the world you command. But I don't think I'm afraid of you." His gaze dropped to her mouth, and her breath hitched. The air crackled with unspoken words, with a tension that had been building for weeks. He lifted a hand as if to touch her cheek, but let it fall back to his side. The control was back, the iron will that kept his kingdom in order. "Good," he said, his voice gruff, as he stepped away, putting distance between them. "Fear makes people careless." The threat from Marco Santoro was escalating. A Moretti warehouse was torched. A key lieutenant was ambushed, though he survived. It was a declaration of war. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier, the guards more vigilant. Anelise could feel Dante's stress like a physical force. He was sleeping less, his temper shorter with his men, though never with her or his mother. One evening, a massive thunderstorm rolled in, shaking the old house to its foundations. Anelise had always hated thunderstorms. They reminded her of that terrible night. She was in her room trying to read when a particularly loud clap of thunder made her jump, sending her book flying. A few moments later, there was a soft knock on her door. It was Dante. He held 2 glasses and a bottle of expensive scotch. "My mother is a heavy sleeper," he said by way of explanation. "I find this helps with the noise." He walked in and poured the mech drink, handing one to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his. He didn't move away. He stood before her, the storm raging outside, a different kind of storm brewing between them. "Santoro made another move, tonight," he said, his voice low. "He tried to hit one of my restaurants. My men were ready for him." "Was anyone hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "He lost 3 men. We lost none." He said it with the detached air of a general reporting casualties. He took a long drink of his scotch. "He's getting desperate. He knows I'm stronger, so he's looking for a weakness." His eyes met hers, and the unspoken words screamed in the silence. "You are the weakness. My mother is the weakness, Dante." She began, her heart aching for him, for the burden he carried. He set his glass down and reached for her, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. The touch was electric, a jolt of lightning that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "I brought you into this," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "Regret, longing. It was the most selfish, reckless thing I've ever done. And God help me. It's the only thing I don't regret." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was desperate hungry, a release of all the tension, all the fear, all the unspoken longing that had been arcing between them for months. It was the kiss of a man starved for something pure in a world of darkness. Anelise, to her own shock, didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her hands coming up to grip his arms, kissing him back with an equal startling ferocity. It was a kiss that sealed their fates. It was a confession, a promise, and a terrible, beautiful mistake. When they finally broke apart, breathless, they stared at each other, the reality of what they had done settling around them. Anelise. He breathed her name, like a prayer. Before either of them could say another word, Dante's phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. He ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. With a curse, he snatched it up. It was Luca. Dante's face hardened as he listened, the brief moment of vulnerability vanishing as the dawn reappeared. "What?" He snarled into the phone. His body went rigid. He looked at Anelise, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. It was a look of pure, unadulterated dread. "He has her," Dante said, his voice a dead, hollow whisper. "Sanro, he has my mother." The news landed like a physical blow. Dante's grief and rage were terrifying to behold. He swept a lamp off a table, shattering it against the wall, a single violent outlet for the storm raging inside him. Then he was ice. His orders were clipped, precise and deadly. Men mobilized, phones rang, and the Moretti estate transformed into a war room. Anelise stood frozen in the middle of his room, the ghost of their kiss still on her lips, now tainted with the metallic taste of fear. This was her fault. Santoro must have found out about her. He was using Isabella to get to Dante, but she was the cause. Luca burst into the room, his face grim. "He's made contact. He wants a meeting." The old red Pahu. Hook, Canary. Midnight. He says to come alone. "It's a trap," Dante growled, pulling on a black jacket and checking the magazine of a handgun with cold, efficient movements. "Of course it's a trap." Luca agreed. He also said to bring the girl. Alberto Russo's daughter. Anelise gasped. It was true. He knew. "You will do no such thing." Dante snarled at Luca, as if he were the one who had suggested it. "She doesn't leave this house." He said if she's not there, he'll send Signora Moretti back in pieces. Luca relayed his voice, heavy. Anelise stepped forward, her mind racing. "You have to take me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "If I'm what he wants, you have to use it. It's the only leverage you have." "Absolutely not." Dante shot back, his eyes blazing with a protective fury. "I am not trading you for my mother. I will get them both back." "Dante, listen to me," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. He stopped, looking down at her hand. "He thinks I'm your weakness. Let him think that. He'll be focused on me. It might give you an opening." He stared at her, torn between his instinct to lock her away in the safest room in the house and the cold, tactical logic of her words. She was right. Santoro's obsession with her, with avenging her father's betrayal, was a powerful psychological tool. "I go," she said again, her resolve hardening, but not as a hostage, as a player. Midnight at the Red Hook Canary was as grim as it sounded. The air smelled of rust brine and decay. Rain slicked the corrugated metal walls. Marco Santoro stood in the center of the vast, cavernous space, flanked by a dozen of his men. He was younger than Dante, with a viper's smile and restless, cruel eyes tied to a chair in the middle of the room, looking small and frail under the harsh industrial lights, was Isabella Moretti. She was gagged, but her eyes were open sharp and filled with silent defiance. Dante and Luca entered from the far end, with Anelise walking between them. She had never felt such terror, but she forced her chin up, her gaze fixed on Isabella. "Moretti, you came," Marco called out, his voice echoing. "And you brought the little rat's spawn, a family reunion of sorts." He gestured to Anelise. "Her father cost my family everything. It's only fitting that his daughter pays the final price." "Let my mother go, Marco." Dante's voice was a low growl, vibrating with controlled violence. "This is between you and me. Oh, it's about all of us now." Marco laughed. "See, I've learned from my father's mistakes. He let this one." He gestured to Anelise. "Slip away. Loose ends have a way of unraveling everything." He pulled out a pistol and pointed it casually at Isabella's head. "Here's the deal. You are going to sign over your entire shipping operation at the Brooklyn docks, and then for my personal satisfaction, I'm going to kill the girl in front of you. Then maybe your mother gets to go home." It was a suicide mission. Dante knew he would never walk out of here alive, even if he agreed. His men were outside, ready to storm the building. But in the chaos, Isabella would be the first to die. Annelise's mind was racing. She looked at Isabella, trying to send her a message of strength with her eyes. Isabella met her gaze, and Anelise saw something flicker there. Not fear, but a sharp, urgent intelligence. Isabella's eyes darted for a split second to her own left hand, which was tied to the chair, and then to a man standing behind Marco. The man was Gianni Amoretti Cupleo, who had been with the family for 20 years. Why was Isabella looking at him? Then Isabella did something extraordinary. With her one visible hand, she made a series of tiny, almost imperceptible signs, shielded from Marco's view, but clear to Anelise. It was a private code they had developed based on old Italian hand gestures. It wasn't ASL. It was something only they would understand. Snake in house. Yanni. The betrayal hit Anelise with the force of a physical blow. Johnny. He had sold them out. This wasn't just an attack from a rival. It was a coup from within. Marco wasn't working alone. Anelise knew she had only seconds to act. She had to get the message to Dante without alerting Marco. "Please," she cried out, stumbling forward, playing the part of the terrified victim. "Don't hurt her. I'll do anything." She let her body sag, forcing Luca and Dante to catch her. As they held her, she pressed her right hand against Dante's back out of sight. Her fingers trembled as she spelled out the letters against his spine in the tactile alphabet she had taught Leo as a child, a way for them to communicate in the dark. G-I-A-N-I. Dante's body tensed almost imperceptibly. He didn't look at Gianni. His eyes remained locked on Marco, but he understood. The entire strategic landscape of the confrontation had just been redrawn. "All right, Marco," Dante said, his voice deceptively calm as he pushed Anelise gently behind him. "You win. The docks are yours." Marco's smile widened. A wise decision. "But I have one condition." Dante continued, taking a slow step forward. "I give the order to my man myself, so there are no misunderstandings." He looked over his shoulder, not at Luca, but directly at the traitor. "Johnny, call it in. Tell our men to stand down and cede the docks to the Santoro family. Effective immediately." Johnny caught off guard, but believing his betrayal was still a secret, hesitated for a second before a smug look crossed his face. This was his moment of triumph. He pulled out his phone. "Yes, boss." It was the opening Dante needed. The second Guani's attention was on his phone. Dante moved. He wasn't aiming for Marco. He drew his weapon in a fluid motion and fired twice, not at Marco, at the industrial light fixture directly above him. Sparks rained down as the heavy lamp shattered, plunging Marco and his closest men into sudden, disorienting darkness. Now Luca Dante roared. Luca, already moving, fired at the men on the right flank. In the same instant, Dante lunged forward, not toward Marco, but toward his mother. Gunshots erupted throughout the cannery as Dante's men, waiting for the signal, stormed the building. Marco, momentarily blinded, screamed in rage, "Johnny, you fool, kill him!" But Johnny was staring in horror as Dante, under the cover of chaos, reached his mother. He wasn't just untying her. In one swift movement, he pulled a small silver pistol that had been strapped to her ankle, hidden beneath her long skirt. Isabella Moretti. The frail, deaf matriarch took the gun from her son's hand with a practiced calm. As Gianni raised his own weapon toward Dante's back, she fired once. The shot was clean, precise. The traitor crumpled to the ground. Anelise watched in stunned awe. Isabella was no fragile victim. She was a Moretti queen, a silent, watchful lioness who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her deafness was not a weakness. It had made her the most observant person in the room. The firefight was brutal and short. When the echoes of the last gunshot faded, Dante's men were in control. Marco Santoro was on his knees, wounded, a look of disbelief on his face as he stared at the old woman who had just shot his inside man. Dante stood over him, his face like thunder. He looked at his mother, safe. He looked at Anelise, pale but unharmed. He looked down at the man who had threatened them both. "My mother and my woman," Dante said, his voice deathly quiet. "You aimed for the heart of my kingdom, Marco. You should have known the queen is the most powerful piece on the board." He then delivered the final, brutal checkmate. The aftermath of the Canary showdown was swift and silent. The Santoro threat was neutralized, their organization crumbling without its head. The rot within the Moretti family, personified by Gianni, was cut out with surgical precision. The balance of power in the city's underworld had been violently, definitively restored. But in the quiet of the Moretti estate, a new order was settling. Anelise was no longer a companion, a translator, or a protected asset. She was a partner, the architect of their victory. The silent message she had relayed had saved them all. She had proven her loyalty, not with words or vows, but with courage and intelligence under fire. She stood with Dante and Isabella on the terrace, watching the first light of dawn paint the sky over the Hudson. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and crisp. Isabella stood between them, holding one of each of their hands. She looked at Anelise, her eyes filled with a profound maternal love. "I knew from the first moment I saw you," Isabella signed, her movements fluid and strong. "A heart like yours doesn't belong in the shadows. It belongs in the light. You are the light in this family, cara mia." Anelise felt tears well in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear. Later, when they were alone, Dante took her to the library. He didn't speak, but led her to his desk. He opened a drawer and took out two things, a fresh passport and a bank book. "The name on the passport is Anelise Stone," he said, his voice soft. "The account has enough money for you and Leo to live anywhere in the world comfortably for the rest of your lives. Dr. The Finch has associates in Geneva, London, Tokyo. Leo's care will continue seamlessly. No one will ever find you. You can be free. You can be invisible again. He placed them on the desk in front of her. It was the out he had promised himself. He would give her a clean break, a chance for her to have the normal life she deserved, far away from the violence and darkness that clung to him. Anelise looked at the documents at the name of a stranger. She thought of a life without the constant threat of violence, a life of quiet anonymity. It was everything she had once wanted. But then she looked up at Dante. She saw the man who read poetry in the dead of night, the son who built a glass palace for his mother, the protector who had been willing to burn down the world for her. Her life here was dangerous, complicated, and shadowed by his sins. But it was also the first place she had ever felt truly seen, the first place she had ever felt home. She pushed the passport and the bank book back across the desk toward him. "My name is Anelise Russo," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And I am not running anymore." A slow, breathtaking smile spread across Dante's face. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him, and it transformed his harsh features into something beautiful. He closed the distance between them, framing her face with his hands. "This world will tarnish you," he whispered. A final warning, a final chance for her to reconsider. "No," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "Some things you can't tarnish." He kissed her, then not with the desperate hunger of their first kiss during the storm, but with a deep, reverent tenderness that spoke of a shared future. It was a kiss of acceptance, of partnership, of a love forged in fire and sealed in silence. She was no longer the shy waitress. He was no longer just the Mafia boss. They were two halves of a new power, built on a unique language of loyalty sight and a love that needed no words. She had stepped into the gilded cage as a prisoner, but she would now rule it as a queen. The queen of a silent, powerful kingdom with her king by her side and the ever-watchful matriarch as their guide. The shadows were still there, but they no longer held any fear. For the first time, they felt like home. Anelise's journey from an invisible waitress to the queen of the Moretti dynasty shows us that true power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in a silent language that only the heart can understand. She entered a world of danger to save her brother, but found her own strength, her own voice in her hands, and a love fierce enough to conquer the darkest of underworlds. Dante Moretti ruled with fear, but it was Anelise's compassion and Isabella's silent wisdom that forged their family into an unbreakable force. Theirs is a story of how the quietest person in the room can be the one who changes the entire game. If their story of love, danger, and silent strength captivated you, please don't let it end here. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who loves a story with twists they'll never see coming. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. We have so many more stories to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for listening.